You know you're growing old when one, you're working a full-time job now for the rest of your possible existence and all, and two, when during that job you suddenly start to get invasive thoughts in your head, making you wonder, hey, you know that game company you really loved when you were young, who made all those games that you like? I wonder how they're doing now. Well, it just so happens that happened to me, though I'm not that old, alright. Fortunately for me though, the company that I was actually really wondering about was still alive, which made it a little easier to find information about, as you can imagine. And also because of the fact that I managed to get an interview with the person who's in charge of the company, which is a private company and it's still run by its founder. We'll go over what I managed to ask him and what I talked about with him during the interview, closer to the end of the video when we talk about where the company is today. But basically, to introduce the company to you guys, the company I'm talking about today is one called Sting. No, silly, I'm not talking about the British man who was a part of the band The Police back in the 70s. What, do you want me to beat some sense back into you with this piece of tofu skin I have over here? I don't think you do, so listen up, we're talking about the game company from Japan. The reason why we are talking about this company is because this is a company that really left a very lasting impression on me. Not in the sense that they traumatized me when I was a kid or something by kidnapping me and forcing me to work in a underground mine under their office mining microchips or something. That clearly didn't happen. But no, it was really because of the fact that they actually created a lot of games that left a lasting impression on me. And just as how GAS was the reason why I wanted to apply to Koei Tecmo back in the day, this was the company that actually made me want to enter the game industry in the first place. And that said, if you're not above the age of very old, you probably don't know what this company is, so let me just give a quick introduction of the company. So Sting was a game company founded by Santo Takeshi back in 1989 after he left Compal. Not the this one which is under Idea Factory. It was this one which has a very similar looking name and font, although the name itself is a little more ergonomic. You know, you can pronounce it a lot more efficiently without having to blow your brains up. When it comes to Sting, interestingly enough, when it comes to the chronology of this company, unlike with both Compile Heart as well as Illusion Studio, which we talked about in the past, where the Japanese wiki was actually more accurate than the English one, funnily enough, this is the first time I actually saw where the English wiki was actually more accurately documenting the games that this company had produced in the past, in spite of the fact that this was a Japanese game company. So with the Japanese wiki, it starts with their first title being Override, which was created in 1991. But with the English wiki, it actually traces back to 1990, 1 year prior, with the two games, Nasset Stadium and Psycho Chaser, with Psycho Chaser being the first ever game they produced. And the reason why this is important is because when you look back in terms of the chronology of all the games they produced, it was Psycho Chaser that would come to define a lot of what characterized the company in the future years, especially overseas. The key difference is that Psycho Chaser was developed by the members who would form the initial team at Sting, except that it was developed under Nasset Soft instead and was released under them. And while this game may not sound very impressive, everything about the story going on from here, it was actually really crazy that they managed to do all of this during their time. Unlike many other titles at the time, this game was really good at building atmosphere and letting you know what you were in for the moment the game started up. And the thing is that it had a really good BGM as well. The most unique thing about this game, however, was the fact that unlike most other bullet hell games, with this one you actually had 4 different weapons, and on top of that, as you clear more stages, you would get more powers that allow you to upgrade these weapons, but every single time you died, you could then reset how much you pumped into each weapon. So basically, depending on how much of the power-ups you put into each individual weapon, it would change how the weapon acts. And you could then reconfigure all of your weapons to adapt to the stages, because unlike most of the other bullet hell games of its time, this game actually did also put a lot of emphasis on the level design as well, with things such as having some stages be more intentionally narrow than others to force you to close quarters, or others where you actually have to deal with a lot more obstacles and destroy them, thus requiring the player to actually use different types of weapons with different levels of power depending on the stage. I know, it doesn't sound very revolutionary nowadays, but back in its time, this was something that was very, very unique. And on top of that, in spite of the fact that this was a bullet hell game, they actually managed to produce it not only without any slowdown or flicker, but they actually managed to produce it with the very rare feature of having 4 players split screen while having no flicker or slowdown. Even to this day, for people who are actually very interested in retro games, this is one that still has quite a cult following as well. From that point on, they would go on to produce many other bullet hell games as well as games for many other companies, but the game that would next put them on the map was a game called Baroque, released in 1998, one of the earlier inceptions of a roguelike game within Japan. This game basically had most of the tropes of what a modern roguelike game would have, stuff like you going through a dungeon where you progressively get stronger, looking for gear, and you being able to send some stuff back. Although if you die, you will lose the rest of the items that you didn't manage to send back and your level will be reset. And you will start at the first floor, although if you completed certain conditions while in the dungeon, it will unlock more floors so you can unlock and progress the story as you grow even further into the dungeon. Stuff like that. Many of the things that you would see in many of these roguelike titles nowadays in terms of meta progression as well as the difficulty of the dungeon itself. That, and it kind of, when you look at the theme of the game, it kind of does have a bit of a Dark Souls vibe to it as well, in terms of how grim, and I guess for this game's case it's more post-apocalyptic as well, of a theme it has, as well as the weird names the characters had, like the Bagged one and stuff like that. I feel like many of the characters in this game, they just have names that make them feel a lot like meme Dark Souls characters like the Horn Girl and stuff like this. The toweled one, he who walks amongst the towels. Isn't that gonna be really cold? Yeah. It kinda is, yeah. Considering it's almost winter, yeah, good luck with that. No, wait, you actually look pretty normal, don't you? I am the weird one. While you were out partying, I was studying the blade. That sword isn't even real. You do realize that, right? Well, yeah, it isn't, but you know, it's just in case. You know, I was told by my sensei to never go all out on my opponent, so this is just me giving you a little bit of a handicap if we so ever had to do battle. Sure, you do that. Alright, maybe your sensei will forgive you one day. No, stop. Look, I get that their company actually did publish most of Stang's games, but no, okay, we're talking about a different company. You go back to your hole. But yeah, when you compare it to many of the modern roguelike games, it really doesn't sound that much more special anymore, due to the fact that a lot of this is already implemented in one game or another, right? Things like a hunger system that will start to drain your HP if you get too hungry within a dungeon, forcing you to manage food consumption as well. You do have games that do that. The whole like dark post-apocalyptic world with a roguelike tower. Yeah, many games are doing that now. But what was interesting was that this was one of the few companies that initially got into this entire genre. And well, you can kind of see that from the way that the game was reviewed as well. It might have been too early for its time, to be honest, with many of the game reviewers giving it a 50 plus out of 100, mostly due to the fact that they found the game too challenging. Ah yes, game reviewers reviewing a game badly just because they couldn't clear it because they aren't good enough. Never change, you people. Cheers to you, and never change. That said, this was another title where while it was not very well liked for its time, nowadays it's actually receiving a bit more love as well, with many of the people who are really into the genre who know of this earlier more retro titles having a cult following for games like this as well. And this trend of producing games with systems that were really unique for its time will continue with many of its later titles as well, one of the more prominent ones being Riviera The Promised Land, which initially released in 2002 for the Wonder Swan, which is a game console that you really wouldn't know about unless you were a boomer in Japan in that time, because this was a console that was created by Bandai and that never really released outside of Japan. That said, with this game you also had a rather unique experience, as what you had here was a menu-based RPG game / dating sim, where your battle system kind of revolved around using weapons a la Fire Emblem, except that instead of just characters using weapons in a triangle, you basically had weapons with durability that you had to train characters to become competent in, and that each member of your party would use in a different way to different effects. So like if you were to take the staff for example, the mage character would use the staff to cast offensive spells, but your character, who was typically a fencer, would use the staff to cast a healing spell instead. So you basically had to manage weapons that had multiple uses and functions for the party, while also ensuring that the characters were all well versed enough to be able to trigger the special skills and stuff with it, because the way the game worked is that you basically had a special meter, and depending on the weapon and the character's proficiency in it, they had a different skill. So like the staff I talked about, the mage would cast it at a max level 3 bar, and for defenser she would cast a heal at 2 instead of level 3, and stuff like this. So you had this very unique system for a battle going on, where instead of each character having different attacks and skills, you really just had 4 weapons that you could bring into battle, and the characters would basically have to juggle using the 4 weapons to cast varying skills, all while you had to ensure that you didn't run out of durability, because unlike in most other games, you could not just buy weapons in this. Instead, you were basically going around the menu for all the different areas within a region, looting and trying to find as many weapons as you can to ensure that you could survive through the entire dungeon with your limited weapon durability and count. Then came out was likely their most successful title of all time, which was Yggdra Union in 2006. In fact, this game did relatively well in spite of the fact that the company wasn't very big. It placed 13th in the year for national sales on the Game Boy Advance, which not the most impressive number, but it did put it within the top 100, which for a game company that was relatively small at the time, and that wasn't really known both within Japan and outside in the rest of the world, this was quite a successful number. In fact, and this was something that a website called Games Are Fun back in the day noticed, there was apparently a rise in the sales of Game Boy Advance during the time that this game released. Whether or not this is actually a correlation is something that is not possible to prove, but it's just kind of interesting that there was this, shift in the purchase of the console itself around the time that this game specifically released. That said, the PSP version, however, apparently ranked 9th place in national sales when it initially released, although with the PSP the issue was that because piracy was such a common thing, this meant that they were only selling about 17,000 copies, which really isn't a very impressive number, but even then, it was a game that was still relatively well performing in the year it released. The game was really reminiscent of Fire Emblem, although with multiple twists to it. First off is the fact that the game actually is very dependent on cards, so these cards that you have to select before a battle starts would dictate many of your stats. So when you select a card during the turn, the shared movement pool of all your characters is basically corresponding to the number on the card's movement. So if the card had a 12 on it, it means that all of your characters combined could make a total of 12 spaces worth of movements. And on top of that, each card had its own attack power, so whenever you beat an enemy in combat, instead of you just killing them outright like in Fire Emblem, with this game, you deal morale damage to them based off the damage value that the card has. And with each time you use the card, that value increases so that you can hit harder the next time around. And so a character wouldn't die instantly from a single exchange, but instead would slowly get its morale depleted over time based off of the cards you used. And on top of the fact that the cards were used for both damage and movement, each card also had a unique effect that either allowed every single character to cast a specific skill, or that basically allowed a specific class or race to cast a spell that would basically give them an advantage in battle. And the way that you use these special abilities that the card have would be to charge a bar that every character has above them during the battle, where you can intentionally weaken yourself during the battle, and basically where you take more damage and deal a bit less, to charge the bar quicker, or to just deplete the bar to hit the enemies even harder instead. So you kind of had a trade-off between do you want to cast a skill or just hit the guy to kill him faster if you can. The reason why this bar is important, however, is also due to the fact that it affects the next other interesting thing about this game. The way it will work is that depending on the character, they will either have a cross or an axe or something like this whenever they declare an attack, and every other character of yours that's included within this range would join them in the attack. And the same would happen for the enemy side. Whenever you attack an enemy multiple times in a battle, so say you have 3 characters attacking one guy, the number of units in his squad will deplete by 1 every single time. So if it starts like him having 8, in the first battle you and him will both have 8, but in the second battle your second squad will have 8 and he will have 7. And so you basically fight an attrition battle where you deal more and more damage to him due to the fact that there's a much bigger disparity between your units and his, which also adds to the multiplier of the amount of damage you deal to his morale at the end of the battle. If it sounds like I'm explaining something that's very convoluted, it's because it is, and the game really had a lot of depth in this sense going for it. And as such, while this game on the surface looked a lot like Fire Emblem because of the fact that you had simple sprites on map, and then once you enter the battle, you had 2 sides hitting each other, the systems within it that made the game different were actually very unique, even to this day, because you really don't see many games doing something like this either. Now granted, you could say it's because it's too convoluted, but at the same time, it's this level of experimentation with systems that would cause Sting to have the unique cult following that it had in later years, and which will make what happens later on feel a little more sad as well. Meanwhile, the other standalone title they created that was quite unique was a game called Nights in the Nightmare, which has a very bussin' soundtrack, I have to say. I still listen to it a lot, and while it wasn't the title to use the DS's systems as in all of it to its greatest potential, they still did something very interesting with it, with the way they designed their game. So basically the way the game worked was that you basically had to use the stylus to guide a spirit across a map, and use it to possess the bodies or the spirits of like knights from futures past or something that you would set along the map, and you would use the possession of the individual knights to basically attack the enemies that were roaming around the map. And so the game really had a lot of depth in terms of what type of knights you could place where, and then the timing that you possess them and angle their heads so you can hit the enemies. All you had to do, while under a time limit for how long you could have the stylus held down and attack enemies for before it goes into the next round, or while enemies were shooting at you, and if they hit you, they basically cut down the amount of time you have left for the round, so you would basically have less and less time to beat them if you couldn't dodge all of their attacks while moving the stylus, while also possessing the ghost to attack them. And the way that you would win was also rather unique. I don't know if I consider it the best, but what you essentially had to do was that once the battle starts, you would first go into a battle sequence where you would dodge and do all of the stuff while the timer runs out. Once the timer runs out, you would go into a screen where you would have to place slots to select what enemy will spawn into the map next. And what you basically had to do to win was to beat enough enemies based off the tic-tac-toe board you see at the bottom until you score a line, and then you would basically win the chapter that you were on. I feel like I've spent way too much time talking about some of the titles this company has released, but yeah, basically this were the styles of games that they used to release during that time. So the reason why they started to slow down was due to their interactions and cooperation in producing games with two other companies. One of which was Aqua Plus, who had Dungeon Traveler series were basically based off of an IP that was initially created by Aqua Plus. And the thing is that their involvement, Sting's involvement with the development of many titles for Aqua Plus actually helped to improve the gameplay of many titles released by Aqua Plus. And on top of that, they would also go on to help Aqua Plus port many of their titles to other consoles, basically making more family-friendly versions of some of the R18 and SFW titles. That said, their cooperation with Aqua Plus began real early in 2004, and when you look at the later titles that Sting produces, you realize that they have been producing games for many years after that as well, so it's not exactly like the cooperation with Aqua Plus themselves specifically brought an end to Sting. So you might be wondering then, well then what did? Why did they stop making as many unique titles of their own? Well, imaginary hypothetical person that I'm talking to who probably doesn't exist. The reason for that is due to another company that they were also simultaneously cooperating with many years later in 2012, and that company was one that you guys probably would already know and love at this point. It's Compound Heart, or well, Either Factory, since Either Factory owns Compound Heart. But basically this would all result in the creation of a new brand called Super Sting, which was basically the name of the very cornyly titled cooperation works between Idea Factory and Sting, starting with the title Generations of Chaos 6, because apparently Idea Factory decided that after producing 5 games in the series, they suddenly wanted Sting to just work on the 6th one and just like change it up however they felt like. And this actually caused it to change quite a bit, because the game's battle system really changed massively as a result of Sting being involved in its development, where the original battle essentially had multiple units, and whenever the units clashed on the battle map, they would go into a full-on like battle war looking thing to the more Yggdra Union-ish style battle for the 6th game, which arguably I wouldn't say it's too bad, but the thing is that when I look at Generations of Chaos 1 to 5, it does look very cool and unique in its own way. And I feel like as someone who has not played it, it's not very easy for me to judge it, and therefore I'm not going to judge it. But at the same time, I feel like for people who were very core fans of the series, this sudden massive change probably would have pissed them off, to be honest. And on top of that, they would go on to help with Idea Factory's development of many other different titles and IPs as well. If I recall, they were also involved in the development of the Dead Alive series, as well as with the one Noah Tactics game, which, if you've played that one on the PS Vita, I believe, it has a lot of Yuri in it, and more importantly, you would actually notice that it has a battle system very reminiscent of Yggdra Union. In fact, the last original title that they created was back in 2013. It was a mobile game called Gather of Dragons, because it seems like in order to become like that one successful game, everyone had to put dragons in their name for some reason. But that aside, this game also ended service in 2020, and even for this mobile game, well, it didn't really have much of a battle system. The battle was automatic. You had a kind of somewhat interesting map puzzle thing that you had to connect the board in order to progress through the areas to beat the enemies or to get to bosses and treasure. Like, even then, they were still trying to do something a little bit unique, but this was the last time that they would actually make a new original title. After that, from 2013 onwards, you really see them only releasing titles under Sting or Aqua Plus for those companies, or making remakes of their older titles such as Baroque and Yggdra Union, which I think recently got a remake for Steam. So you might be wondering then, well, if they haven't been making a new game since 2013, what happened, right? How are they doing now? And well, as I mentioned a little bit at the start of the video, I think. Oh, it's just really catching up with me, huh? But yeah, as I mentioned at the start of the video, I did manage to get an interview with the leader of the company, the head, Santo-san himself, because at the time they were actually kind of looking for people to join the company as well. It was kind of a job interview, but at the same time, I did tell them that I wanted to ask a bit more for my own research for potentially making a video as well. And upon hearing that, they did say that they would rather I not record the thing because it is also in part as a job interview, but they were okay if I were to disclose it like this. So this is the very weird format that we're going to do while talking about all of this. So Santo-san himself was a really great guy. He actually told me a lot, and he was willing to explain a lot about the company and what they were planning to do for the future. Also, one very massive thing that he did tell me was the fact that the people who worked on many of their older titles, such as Riviera and Yggdra Union and all of those, had already left the company at this point. So aside from the founder himself, most of the other veterans that worked with him during that time are no longer with the company. And as such, they are largely focusing on remaking as well as remastering their older titles so as to, one, add new features to those games and help preserve them for longer, as well as to give their younger staff more experience. Like, Santo-san was really cool about it. Like, he did mention that he is very pro-game preservation. He is very interested in the idea of ensuring that all of the titles they made in the past would still be playable today, which is why recently there's been a lot more push to put their titles onto modern platforms, especially Steam, and to ensure that the remasters for most of these games actually have better QOL, as well as rebalances to make them fit better in the modern age. So like for Yggdra Union, for example, they actually added a new difficulty so that people who found the game too challenging in the past could play it as well. And they also started to add in more QOL to make the game easier to understand, especially when it comes to stuff like readability of the cards and stuff like this. Which, yeah, I can kind of get behind. Whether or not there's just massive copying on their end, it's a bit hard to say, of course, but at the very least, from the way he was speaking about game preservation, I was talking to him about it, he did seem to be quite genuine about it. So, especially when it comes to the next point that he spoke of, because with the way he put it, it actually felt a little too real for me to think that it would have been a lie, which is that one other thing he mentioned was that as a company, Sting has always been making the games that other companies didn't want to make. Which, it sounds on the one hand like they're just basically making the garbage that other companies didn't want to touch or something like that. But far from it, the reason why this ended up being the case is because of the design philosophy of the company. They love to create games that were more experimental with new features that, whether or not it would actually jive with the market is one thing, but that they would test and see if this new interesting features, like with Riviera and Yggdra and the like, all of those features would be something that players would enjoy. And it is because of this reason that many of the bigger companies who have a very fixed brand identity and who don't want to release too many shit titles, I'm looking at you, Bandai, Sting was more than happy to actually pick up many of those titles to produce them. Though that said, that applies really a lot more to their earlier years. When you talk about like in the past 5-6 years especially, this is not as much the case anymore, because what has happened is that across the years, many of their experienced devs have left the company, and it's in a sense no surprise because the company hasn't really been making titles of their own for like the past 10 years. Like, the thing here is that if a person was very experienced and wanted to develop new titles, there isn't really as much of an incentive to stay with the company. You know, as much as people would like to think that in Japan it's very uncommon for people to leave their company and to quit their job and go to another company because of like loyalty and all that whatever stereotype there is. In the game industry, it's actually not really the case. People do shift between jobs quite often, especially in their younger years. And by younger, I know some of you people below the age of 18 here are gonna be like, oh, you mean like me? No, I mean like even up to like their 30s and sometimes even their 40s, people are still relatively mobile in terms of their jobs. So people who have maybe 10 years or more of game dev experience are still willing to leave the company they've been with all this time. And this has basically led to the company being stuck in a bit of a churn loop because of the fact that they will hire new fresh grads, and with Japan you have the very big issue of when it comes to things like designers, as in like system designers, people who come up with like game balance or new features in the games. There is still that level of like Japanese hiring practice where you hire generalists, which ends up in a situation where sometimes you're hiring people who have no experience developing games to put them into these positions. And the thing is that with companies that are not as popular or not as famous anymore, especially with Sting having not released a new title in the last 10 years, they tended to receive many fresh graduates who are basically people who graduated from faculties which had nothing to do with game design and had no game design experience, who wanted to get into the game industry, meaning that they would then have to train these people up from scratch, which in Japan with many industries is quite common. I remember when I was working in Koei, one of the people I was working with and who actually climbed pretty high in the company was someone who entered with a degree in mineralogy. Yeah, I guess you could say that they were a gem, a diamond in the rough. But the problem is that by the time you train up these people, if the company is still not in a state where they can create new titles, then these people who have built experience are then gonna just leave the company as well, and then you're just gonna be stuck in this churn loop forever. And this is especially the case because of the fact that while the whole idea of the Japanese hiring culture where you bring in people with a can-do good attitude who will be loyal to the company and you raise them to be the type of person you want to be might sound very tempting to some people, you also have to understand that the issue with this system is that you kind of need people in the company who can train these new people to be competent in the first place. But that said, all hope is not lost, I think, hopefully. He also did mention how over the years, the company is still actually earning quite a lot of money due to the fact that all of these titles that they are producing for other companies as well as the remasters are raking in a decent amount of money at least. And this has allowed them to stockpile a decent amount of money, which he's hoping would help to be able to fund the upcoming titles that they want to create. So it's only a matter of time before they try to pull in more people and use the money that they have stocked up. So maybe someday in the future, there might still be a chance that we might see another very bizarre game coming out of Sting. Well, as long as it doesn't end up something like Criminal Goals, we should be fine, but hey, you never know, so let's just sleep with both eyes closed until that happens. Where was I going with that last bit? But yeah, okay, yeah, that's all I have to say for today. Thank you guys for watching the video till this point. I hope this was an interesting video. I know it was for me when I was making it, at least, since this was a company that did leave quite an impression on me as a child, as I mentioned in the opening of this video, and I'm repeating myself a little here. I do apologize, but I just really wanted to emphasize the point. Hopefully you guys, you boomers especially, know what this company is. And if you enjoyed their games, well, hopefully if you're wondering what happened to them, now you too have a better idea of what did happen across the years. But yeah, if you enjoyed the video, do feel free to subscribe, give this video a like. Also, we have a Discord in case you're interested in joining it, so you can tell me how much you didn't like this video, or tell me how much you are nostalgic for some of their older games. We can both get that nostalgia boner. This feels a little wrong, but we can both enjoy the nostalgia together. Also, thank you to Ran Yakumo for the 2 months of support so far. I'm hoping I got the name that I'm supposed to display here correctly. As per your request, I've changed the name that I'm putting in the credits to this instead. Hopefully I didn't miss out part of the name. But yeah, thank you so much once again for the support you have given for this past 2 months. The money you've sent, I'll make sure to put to good use. Some of it is going into the newer Kosoge titles as well. I bought some more And well, I'll probably need a little bit of props if I'm gonna do something silly for the video, so it's going to stuff like that. Which, yeah, if you guys are wondering what would happen if you send me money to support the channel and me creating more stuff, it's going to stuff like that or into the creation of other videos. It's not going into a gacha addiction or anything, don't you worry. I don't think I've spent on a gacha in a while, like a long while. And if anything, this money has helped me to stay clear of it. But yeah, okay, I feel like I've wasted enough of you guys' time before just prattling at the end. I don't know if this part, if people actually enjoy listening to me just talk about it like this, but yeah. Have a good day. Enjoy yourselves till we meet again, hopefully. The next video will probably be a more event related one because I kind of want to talk about another relatively cool one I went to. You will find out if you join the Discord, I guess. But that's it. Enjoy your day. Take care and... bye-bye.